We will go ahead and get started so that we can stay on time while others are joining. Welcome everybody to PAYCO's Legal Insight Session. Today is February 23rd, 2023. My name is Becky Lewis, so thank you for joining today. I want to give a shout out immediately to Anderson's Reporting. We appreciate them providing our Zoom capabilities to bring PAYCO programming to all of our members. Some quick announcements, things that are coming up. March 8th, we have a litigation and in-house roundtable with Paul Unger. Check out the PAYCO calendar for that event. Same with March 13th, we have a general membership meeting where we will be addressing paralegal licensure. We have a speaker coming to talk about that. March 31st, Capital University Law School is having a compliance forum that is free. You can attend in person or virtually if you're interested in that. And of course, our Paralegal Day celebration is May 15th. So please put the hold date on your calendar. It begins at 5:30 and is in Gahanna this year. September 29th is our biennial workshop and exhibition that's coming up. Which will be a day event, 9 to 4-ish. So put a hold on your calendar for that as well. So those are some of the things that are going on in PAYCO. We also have the wellness initiative that started with yoga and meditation sessions. So if you're interested in those things, please feel free to sign up through our calendar. I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Very excited to have Steve Francis with us. He is the president and lead strategist with Franchise D&I Solutions. Steve has over 30 years of experience as a public and private sector lawyer and diversity professional. He has served as a chief diversity officer of the 14th largest city in the United States. Steve also served as a diversity leader for a Fortune 500 company, also heading up the company's government relations, community relations, media relations, communications, and philanthropy. He is the founder and former president and board member of the Central Ohio Diversity Consortium, Diversity and Inclusion Best Practices Clearinghouse for public, private, governmental, nonprofit, and academic institutions throughout Central Ohio. And we are very lucky to have you today, Steve. So I'm going to hand over the floor to you to go ahead and present your presentation. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Becky, for having me, and for all the Paralegal Association of Central Ohio members. Thanks for joining this afternoon. First, some housekeeping. There was one slide that I wanted everybody to print off in advance, and it is slide number 16, which looks like this, the Trusted 10 exercise. So if you haven't done that, or if you can do it quickly, please print that off, or get a blank piece of paper and draw 10 rows down and maybe 7 or 8 columns across, leaving some space at the bottom for writing some notes about that exercise that we'll do. Also, if at all possible, please turn your cameras on. I don't judge people about bad hair days or anything like that. I just want to see that you're engaged and not running on the treadmill or eating lunch or doing something else that takes you away from your full engagement of our workshop. Basically, if you didn't turn your camera on, it would be similar to you listening to me do the presentation just like this. And so I appreciate your cooperation in turning your videos on so that we can see and hear everybody as we go through this important information. It's called The Value of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I just thought I would go over some fundamental concepts of the workshop. First, diversity is a fact. I like to say it this way: no walls, no law, no executive orders will prevent the inevitability of the diversification of our society and our world. You can't even take the books off the shelf to try to avoid it. This is something that is here to stay, and it's actually going to get more and more diverse before it gets less diverse. In fact, they say that by 2040-ish, we will be what they call a minority majority society, where collectively all the groups of minority ethnic populations will outnumber the non-ethnic or the white populations in America. And so once we grapple with that fact, we can leverage it to our competitive advantage. Also, inclusion is an act. It takes affirmative action all day, every day. I can't take a day off from inclusion. So if at your workplaces, you sense that folks are being inclusive on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and not Tuesdays and Thursdays, then you tend to shut down on those Tuesdays and Thursdays. You're less productive, you're less engaged. You don't feel like you belong in that organization on those Tuesdays and Thursdays where they're excluding you from those important decisions that are being made, or ideas about how to develop the next best product or service delivery. So it's a 24/7, all day, every day proposition. It has to be modeled and acted out. You can't put a poster on the wall that says inclusion and automatically it becomes inclusive. It comes from modeling inclusive behavior, walking and talking. There's a saying, people don't care about what you say. They do care about how you make them feel. And inclusion is a feeling that you get from having an environment that models inclusion. Equity must be exact. I can't go to Costco, Sam Club, buy a bulk item for every person on this workshop and say, this is for you for the rest of your life. Good luck. I haven't given you anything different than I've given anybody else. But one takeaway that I really want you to take away from this workshop is fair is not equal. So the goal for equity is fairness for people that are not equally situated. So as there is diversity that is unique per individual, it doesn't make sense to give diverse individuals the same thing for them to access opportunity that everybody is enjoying. What we mean by exact, we need to lean into the equitable needs of each individual and their unique diverse needs and find out what that is and provide that, the resources, support, all those kinds of things that they need to access their opportunity for success. It doesn't come easy. And race is a social construct. Race is a humanly invented classification system that was developed to recognize differences between what some folks back in the 1800s called race. But I want you to know that there's no gene, chromosome, or DNA in our body called race. This thing is humanly invented to classify people to group one group of people sort of better off or superior or more desired than another. And it's politically and socially real in our society, but we want you to lean towards culture instead of towards race, which isn't real. So white, black, Asian, Hispanic, 2 or more, those means nothing. Yet we're required to check those boxes on the census. It means more if we say, I'm from Bolivia and Cuban descent. My mother is Cuban, my father is Bolivian. It means more to say I'm Irish, Polish, American. It means more to say that I'm, from Jamaica and India than it does if I'm Black. So we want you to lean towards culture, which tells you really a lot about who you are versus these labels of race, which have no meaning. Any questions about that? All right. So our firm likes to define these important terms in one-word themes. So for diversity, we say that means value. Diversity is valuable. The EEOC, Webster Dictionary definition for diversity is different backgrounds, experiences, thoughts, races, genders, gender identities, abilities, etc. Those laundry list of things that make us different. However, excuse me, the proposed definition that our firm likes to use is unique differences in thought, beliefs, values, life experiences. Can anybody unmute and tell me if you can see with the naked eye thoughts, beliefs, values, and life experiences? Can you see that?
No, you definitely can't. Because if you look at somebody, you say, oh, you are an average person. Okay, well, the average person experiences, what you would think of like almost like a Leave It to Beaver situation. But that's not everybody's experience. It's, maybe that person doesn't have enough money to eat. You can't see that. You can't see that somebody was just like, verbally insulted a block away from you. So that you can't see those experiences.
Absolutely. And that's what makes each and every one of us uniquely diverse. Now, unique, if I said, oh, she's different, that's sort of a negative context, right? But if I said, oh, she's very unique, that has a redeeming special quality. Uniqueness is special. Difference is, oh, that's different. So we want to use the word unique in describing diversity whenever we can, because there's no particular individual exactly like each and every one of you on this workshop. You are each diversely unique. Whether you're all white, whether you're all female, you're still richly and diversely, uniquely different, right? And so that, along all those invisible things that we can't see, along with life, with human and cultural characteristics, that's based on who we are. That's the DNA. That's why some of us have blue eyes, brown eyes, blonde hair, brown hair, short, tall, stout, thin. We can't trade that in, right? That's what we're born with. That's the cards that we were dealt. And where we come from, that's the environment that cocooned and shaped us into who we are. What side of the railroad tracks we grew up on, what side of the river, whether we were raised in a single parent home or dual parent home, whether we were raised in Alabama or in New York or in California, right? Those are the where we come from that make us uniquely different. And so there's a saying about diversity that we make 90% of our judgments about people based on only the 10% that we see. That's not right, is it? Yet it's real. I always like to say it may not be right, but it's real. So we want you to focus on those things that you cannot see, that 90% of what you can't see, because that is the quintessential elements that make each and every one of us uniquely diverse. That's the most important part of who we are, the part that you can't see with your eye. Here's a business case for diversity slide, and it's from the US Census. This is US Census data from 2020. Now there's red font in there that I'll explain. But let's go 10-year periods by 10-year periods. In 2000, there was 69.1% white population in the United States. 10 years later, it was 63.7%, roughly 5.5% less white population in America. In 2020, they reported 58.8%. Can the mathematicians tell me how much of a decrease that is from 2000 to 2020 in the white population? Basically, more than 10 percentage points less. A reduction of 10% or more of the US population, a reduction of what the white population in the US. Now, imagine with me, if you will, what will happen in 2040, 20 years from 2020. Can anybody extrapolate those decreases out and tell me what would likely be the percentage of the white population in 2040? Just unmute if you have a guess.
Substantially less. I feel like all the numbers will either start to like reach an equilibrium, or, I mean, obviously the number will go down.
Yeah, if we use our imagination, we can estimate that 10 percentage points more will decrease for the white population. That will put us at roughly 48.8%, leaving the other non-white populations totaling more than the total of the white population in our country. And that is when we would become what it has been called a minority majority society in America, where the collective percentage of all the diverse populations outnumber the percentage of white population in our country. Now, the red font. There was a debate about whether to include a citizenship question on the census questionnaire. You might remember that. That scared the heck out of Hispanic folks, other immigrants who feared to be deported. And so it stands to reason that the Hispanic numbers of 18.7, the Black numbers of 12.1 in red font, the Asian numbers of 5.9 are probably underreported, meaning that they're actually higher than that. And it stands to reason that an aggregate percentage of the white population is probably even lower than 58.8% in 2020. So this minority majority is accelerating even faster than the numbers tell us because of things like a citizenship question threatened to be on the census. Folks were running away from the census reporters and deleting census emails and tearing up census mail that came in the mail. Now, the next word is equity. Equity must be exact, as I said before. And equity is about engaging people and circumstances with fairness, justice, impartiality, honesty, balance, compassion, decency, all of those things with an open mind. Now, the important part of this paragraph is equity is required for people and for circumstances. Circumstances could be your work rules and your work policies. You have to audit those things to make sure periodically that they don't have a disproportionate exclusionary fact or unfair factor on one group of your employment population versus another. You know, why do certain people tend to be excluded from opportunities to advance and get promoted within law firms, within law departments, what have you? And so if you're honest with yourself, sometimes these rigid requirements and procedures and circumstances exclude certain people for various reasons. We have to understand, and I like to say it this way, don't tell somebody to pull themselves up by the bootstraps if you know they can't afford to buy boots, right? Don't expect a hungry child that comes to school with no breakfast to be able to learn in the same way that a child coming to school that's fully fed. You know, we have to understand the equitable needs of each individual and do that extra effort that it takes to connect with them where they stand on the diversity continuum and give them the resources and support they need to be successful, just like everybody else. Equity makes sure that you understand that everybody doesn't start at the same place on the starting line of life, of the race of life, but we must ensure that they can finish at the same place in that race in life if they choose to. And that takes work, that takes support, that takes resources, that takes leaning in and understanding what their equitable needs are. So the proposed definition here is ensuring that people and circumstances are provided with exactly what they need to gain access to opportunity, be successful, and live a full life, understanding that fair is not equal, and equity is not the same as equality. Here's an illustration to make that clear. Inequality at the upper left-hand corner of this image, you see the tree that represents the system is bent ever so slightly towards the person in the red jumpsuit. You also see the tree has plentiful opportunity, that's the apples, on one side of the tree that's tilted towards that person, and sparing opportunities on the other side with the question mark, wondering, why can't I get the same opportunity as this other person? right? It's because the system is ever so slightly skewed or bent toward the advantage of that person in the red. You look at equity and you recognize, oh, equality, I'm sorry, down below. And you say, okay, well, maybe the person in the blue needs a ladder. So that's that same is not equal, right? Fairness is not equality. You give them the same size ladder, but the guy in the blue jumpsuit is still not getting opportunity because why? The system is ever so slightly bent that person can just reach up and pick opportunity off the tree at their desire. And so we see the equitable needs of each individual, and we make sure we give tools and resources that allow that person to reach those opportunities. But there's still way more opportunities on the other side of that system than there is on the other. So knowing that as leaders, and I believe all of us are leaders, we lead from where we are, whether we're paralegals or senior partners in law firms, we must get 2x4s, get wires and string and prop that tree back so it's as straight as possible. We need to figure out how to fix the system so that it is fair and that each side of that tree begins to populate plentiful opportunities for both people, for both sides, right? So that's what we're talking about in this continuum of inequality, equality, equity, and justice. Any questions about that? Inclusion. The one word theme for this is success. Those who choose to include that rich and valuable and unique diversity in problem solving, decision making, product development, service delivery, legal service delivery, will be more successful than those who do not. It's as clear as day. There's plenty of studies that demonstrate this. Those organizations that practice inclusion are far more successful because they are engaging, valuing, recognizing, utilizing, and appreciating the rich diversity and the way of thinking about things differently and solving problems differently and getting creative solutions than if they didn't practice inclusion. There's a saying that you may have heard, if you always do what you've always done, you will always be what you've always been. And I'm sure that your organizations don't want to always be what they've always been in this rapidly changing, evolving, and highly competitive economy. So you want to be different by engaging different perspectives and viewpoints so that you can help deliver the most creative, innovative, and impactful public service outcomes for your employees, residents, and the entire community. That's the business case for diversity at the bottom part of that paragraph. You're delivering the most creative, innovative, and impactful outcomes because you've engaged and utilized your diversity of thought. Okay? Any questions? Now, I'm going to ask you to unmute and do the Pledge of Inclusiveness. I'm going to read the first two paragraphs, and I want you to read the third one with me. Repeat after me. So first, we value each person's individuality. A person's ever-changing needs demands advocacy to support their civil rights and their full inclusion in our communities. This is the Pledge of Inclusiveness, right? It demands advocacy to support people's civil and rights and full inclusion. Also, inclusion strengthens our communities and our world, and we're obligated. So there was a demand in the first paragraph for advocacy and support, and there's an obligation in the second paragraph to develop and implement innovative practices to ensure inclusion and a sense of community among our employee population. So please unmute, and we'll read the last paragraph together, and I'm going to ask you to repeat after me. You could also raise your right hand if you want. How many of you remember, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty, justice for all. We can read it in our sleep. So read along with me. We must always pledge.
We must always
Always
pledge.
pledge
To treat each person as an individual soul.
to treat each
Each
person
person
as
as an individual soul,
And to fully support him, her, them.
and to fully support him, her, them,
So that no matter their sex, race, age, disability, creed, or religion.
So that no matter
under
their
their
sex,
sex, race, age, disability,
creed, or
creed, or
religion,
religion,
They feel like they belong.
they feel like they belong.
Thank you. And this may seem a little silly, but it's an important thing for you to have inclusion at the front of mind before you enter that workplace. So I challenge you to take that pledge of inclusiveness. Just commit to yourself that you're going to be inclusive during that work day. You can't be inclusive on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, right? Because this leads to people wanting to leave and go where they feel they belong, right? What does the word them mean in the second line of that last paragraph? Anybody have any thoughts? The word them?
Somebody who identifies as neutral, like I'm not a he, I'm not a she.
Non-binary.
Non-binary, LGBTQ plus community. Guess what? They require our support and demand our advocacy too. They require inclusion as well. So this includes those him, her, them, they're pronouns that are used frequently in business, but that them is those non-binary LGBTQ plus folks. We need to include them in this inclusion pledge as well. All right. Here's the Jane Elliott challenge, I like to call it. Jane Elliott is a pioneer in diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you go on my website, you'll see her pictured with me with this same sweatshirt on. Prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance. And she came to Columbus and did the same thing that's in this slide. I had her come to Columbus when I was Chief Diversity Officer of the City of Columbus. And she said the same thing. If you as a white person would be happy to receive the same treatment that our Black citizens do in this society, please stand. That was the challenge. Nobody stood. She pauses and she said, you don't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way Blacks are in this society, stand. More market silence and lack of movement. She continues, nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. Jane wants to know why we are so willing to accept it or allow it to happen for others. So, why do you think nobody stood? Somebody just unmute and tell me your thoughts. Why do you think nobody stood? Now, let me make clear, this isn't a black-white thing. We could substitute women for the word Black. We could substitute LGBTQ for the word Black. We could substitute Hispanic, Asian, you name it, right?
They don't want to be the only one.
This is a us-them type of challenge, right? So go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, they just don't want to be the only one in a sea of people who disagrees with the way that those people are treated, whether you're a woman or a person of color or an LGBTQ.
I'm glad you said that. And that's the common response I get. They don't want to be the lone wolf standing against something that they know is not right, right? But I can tell you for sure, and there's a video on how a movement starts that I'd recommend you Google. But one person gets up and starts dancing at this Woodstock type concert. And then the second person joins them. And that's the person that has the courage, not the first person, but that second person who gets up from their their blanket at the Woodstock concert and starts dancing like there's no tomorrow with this one other person. And then pretty soon in the video, there are hundreds of people that are up and dancing. And so again, that's an example of that a movement starts with one. And what Jane Elliott is doing here, she's explaining the importance of allyship. You may have heard of being an ally and allyship. Being an ally is standing against what is wrong and standing up for what is right. At its core, the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion center around knowing the difference between right and wrong. You know in your gut what's fair and right and just. And if you see it happening to others, you have to take a stand against it. If you see something in a meeting where a woman is being disrespected in a room full of men, a man has to be an ally and stand up and say, well, you know, Barbara gave the same answer 10 minutes ago. Why didn't we recognize it then? Right? So we're talking about being an ally and understanding what's right and what's wrong. And if we don't take a stand, we will allow the things that are poisoning our society and dividing us as people to continue and worsen. So I challenge you to be an ally as Jane Elliott is challenging us all. Here is a becoming anti-racist image or diagram. And just let me first disclaim that I'm not calling anybody on this workshop a racist. If you'll note, the diagram doesn't contain the word white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, because you know why? Discrimination doesn't belong to any one culture, race, gender. There are racist women. There are racist millennials. There are racist LGBTQ. There are racist Japanese. There are racist Africans. There are racist elderly people. So we have to understand and recognize the behaviors that are shown on this diagram that describe how people may be moving from the fear zone of becoming anti-racist, improving to the learning zone of becoming anti-racist, and then improving even more to the growth zone of becoming anti-racist. So let's look at some of the behaviors. Above the dark blue circle, I deny racism is a problem, right? I'm in denial. Ostrich with its head in the sand. Then in the learning zone, I at least recognize that racism is a present and current problem. Do any of you recognize that racism is a present and current problem in our society today?
Yes.
And then in the growth zone, I identify how I may unknowingly benefit from racism or how I might unknowingly enjoy privilege. Now, I'm African-American male, 6'3.5", Christian, educated with a college degree or a law degree, actually. I have privilege, yet I still experience racism because of the one element of my, diverse culture, which is my skin color, right? When you're tall, you get advantages in our society. When you're male, you get advantages in our society. All those things contribute to our privilege and our ability to avoid racism. Now, below the dark blue circle, I talk to others who only look and think like me. I'm in my sameness bubble. I am scared of things that are different than me because I've heard about those people, right? And what they do. I've seen them on the news. And in the learning zone, I listen. I at least want to listen to others who think and look differently than me because guess what? I might learn something. That's why that's in the learning zone. And in the growth zone, I surround myself with others who think and look differently than me. I dive off the diving board and dive in the deep end of the pool and sink or swim in those differences, right? Diversity is understanding that people do have different opinions than you, and that's okay. You know, opinions are like something else we have. Everybody has one, right? But that doesn't make your opinion the only opinion or the right opinion. So we have to listen so that we can learn that there are views out there that differ from ours, whether it be on gun control, abortion, you know, critical race theory, whatever. Here's another one. I strive to be comfortable under the fear zone bubble line, or above it. I avoid hard questions. Who doesn't avoid hard questions? And then you learn and you seek out questions that make you uncomfortable. And then when you're in the growth zone, you even sit with your discomfort until it actually becomes normal and comfortable. Knowing that there are differences out there, we have to understand we need to lean into and be curious about those differences and not repel or segregate ourselves from those differences. This next slide is called schemas down below, but it's a demonstration of implicit bias. The title says, if you have a brain, you have bias. It's totally natural and normal for each one of us to have biases. Biases don't make us good people or bad people. They just make us biased people. However, it's how we act upon or fail to act upon our biases and stereotypes, or what we do or don't do in certain situations when we're confronted with our biases. That's what can cause harm, discrimination, disparate treatment, and even death to others, particularly when we're talking about law enforcement officers who may think that somebody is doing something or has a weapon when they actually do not, because of some stereotypical things that they've been exposed to that tells them that those certain people are more likely to be criminals than other people. So when we look at these triggers, these colored boxes are triggers of implicit bias. So when we have time constraints, when we're faced with uncertainty, when we have fear at the job or in our social circles, when we deal with stress, when we're tired and fatigued, these are all triggers of implicit bias. So when you feel one of these sensations through your work day or in your social circles outside of work, I guarantee you that a unconscious bias is right around the corner. So if you're about to make any important decisions or exercise judgment, you need to count to 5 and figure out what's really going on. Our brain is a powerful tool, and it constantly seeks what it recognizes as comfort, safety, and path of least resistance. What happens also is our brain is exposed to 11 million bits of information every moment, 11 million with an M, from all of our senses. Yet our brain can only consciously process 40 of those 11 million bits of information every moment. So it's an information overload, and it makes shortcuts and associations with bits of information that may or may not have anything to do with each other, right? So schemas, oh, and I'll throw another trigger in there. Anybody been hangry? I'll throw hunger in there. If you are hungry and you're thinking about just getting that something to eat, you're going to make those quick decisions that are going to be based on your biases and not on your clear thoughts. So unconscious expectations or biases associated with members of a group or with circumstances that guide your perceptions and behaviors. That's the scientific term for implicit bias, which is schemas. Actions based on schemas is pervasive and inevitable. Like I said, the goal is not to eliminate your bias, because that's impossible. The goal is to identify your biases when they pop up, when these triggers occur, and manage them before they do cloud your judgment and lead to poor decision-making. So actions based on schemas is pervasive and inevitable. Schemas can be distorting and result in bad decisions and wrong or poor judgment. Now, how many of your organizations that you work with want you to exercise wrong decisions and poor judgment? I think not. This next slide is what I will leave to you at your leisure to review. It's a very helpful slide that has nine common thinking biases. But the thing I like about this slide is it describes what that bias is, and it also suggests how you can overcome it. Again, these are tools, skills, and resources that you can use to better identify and manage your biases. I'll just give you one as an example. The IKEA effect. How many of you familiar with IKEA? What it is, you place a disproportionately high value on the things you personally create or your ideas, right? Overcoming it, just because it's your idea, doesn't make it a good one. Know when to cut your losses, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect in the middle row. What it is, unskilled people overestimate their ability, and experts doubt themselves for some strange reason. So there's a middle ground here. Take anyone who makes definitive 100% statements with a pinch of salt. You know, whenever you hear, I always do this, or I've always seen, or I never do this, or I always do that, you know, kind of put your caution light up, because that person is probably overestimating or underestimating the situation based on their bias. So take a minute at your leisure and review all those and see if it won't help you try to identify some things that might be happening in your workplace. Here's a video that I'm going to play for you, and it's called Peanut Butter and can you all see that?
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year
We
that
see the
implicit bias
presentation,
went
Steve.
somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others but not in yourself. We're biased.
You know, again, when you identify biases in others, you know, hey, they're biased. I'm not biased. I don't have a biased bone in my body. That's not true, and that's not possible. What we need to do is figure out, you know, what our biases might be, identify them, and manage them. You know, that video talked about association. So when we associate when we say peanut butter, we automatically think jelly. Can somebody unmute and tell me what association you make with cookies? So if I said cookies and milk, right? If I said strawberries and what would you say?
Green.
Right. Hand and glove, right? You know, they just are associated with each other. I want each and every one of you to unmute, and I'm going to ask you to repeat, answer a question based on what I'm going to show you. So can everybody see this piece of paper?
Yeah.
We can see it. Yeah, you're holding it up.
Yeah, there's nothing on it, but I just want you to tell me what the color of the paper is.
Looks blue to me, like a light blue.
Now it looks white.
Okay, white. It's white. I'm sorry. Sorry about the light.
That's okay.
Yeah, what's the color of the paper?
White.
Okay, I need everybody to say it all at once. Please unmute and say what the color of the paper is.
White.
White. White.
Okay, all at once. What's the color of the paper?
White.
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 What do cows drink?
Milk.
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 Oh,
Well,
butter.
fell victim to a real-time demonstration of associations and how in real time, just over 20 seconds, I had you say the word white a few times, and I mentioned the word cow, and the first thing you thought about was milk. You didn't even pay attention to what the question was. Your mind just associated a cow with white, and milk came out. And so this is how these associations can take over your thinking. Remember those 11 million bits of information I told you about? Now, actually, cows drink beer because they drink a lot of they eat a lot of grains and stuff and hops. So, no, actually, you know, we all fall into these traps, right? And so we have to be on guard all day, every day against our associations, stereotypes, and biases taking over our thinking process and leading us to say things that make absolutely no sense. Wrong or poor judgment, right? Okay, next slide. We're going to talk about systemic bias for just a second. And this is a continuum. They're all interconnected in this circle. So implicit bias is influenced by structural bias, right? So things like voting rights, FHA loans, and how they're approved and where they're offered, redlining, you know, residential segregation. You can only live in these certain areas, or you folks need not apply to live here because we don't have you kind living in our neighborhood or our subdivision, right? Access to education, green space, resources, safety, and healthcare, all are involved in these systemic biases. Jobs and hiring and advancement within organizations are impacted by structural bias. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. You have history, policies, and practices on the right side of this circle with the shackles for slavery and with the quill pen and the Constitution that's intended to be the Constitution. Did you realize that at one point, our Constitution literally said that slaves were 3/5 of a human being, not even a whole human being? The reason they did that was because the slave owning states, they didn't want them to have more congressional representatives than the non-slave holding states. So they discounted the human worth of slaves so that those southern slave states wouldn't have more congressional representatives than the non-slave states. Yet and still, it was ingrained in our policies and practices that slaves were 3/5 of a human being. Then you have things like inequitable outcomes and racial disparities that we see on the news every day. that we read about in the newspaper. We see inequitable outcomes and disparities in the jailhouse, in the courthouse, and even in the schoolhouse, right? And those inequities and disparities are played out in the priming and association and assumptions that we see in the media, on our social media, our TV, our radio, or newspapers. How many of you are old enough to remember that at midnight every day, the TV screen went blank and went, ooh, this little, and then the Star Spangled Banner played, right? And the TV was done. My goal as a child was to stay up for that so that I could say, hey, I didn't go to bed till midnight. But now we are exposed all day, every day, 24/7 to media. And that's where the priming and associations drill into our mind these biases and stereotypes and associations that we see playing out in our actions and decisions. So question, which one of these three on this circular continuum do you think contributes most to your individual bias? Which one of these systemic biases do you think contributes most to your own personal implicit biases? Is it history, policies, and practices? Is it the inequitable outcomes of racial disparities in our society? Or is it the priming, association, and assumptions through our media? Unmute if you have any ideas on that.
I think that the priming, associations, and assumptions played a really big, part of it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What we see on TV is driven by our policies and procedures. We hide behind those and say, well, we've got to send these people to jail because, we've heard that they're bad people. And then we see them in the jail and not graduating from high school and being, being sentenced to extensive sentences. And then we see them on the news again. So it's a cycle, right? Anybody have any other thoughts? Anybody think any of the other three influence your individual bias? Any thoughts?
I think our history, policies, and practices. It's where you were raised, how you were raised, the things you were exposed to, from that. For instance, I was raised in Clintonville in Columbus, Ohio, but I wasn't unfortunately exposed to that many people of diverse and different backgrounds because everybody that lived in Clintonville was pretty similar to me.
Yeah, and I'm a lawyer, and I really think that history, policies, and practices have play a big part in our biases. Restrictive covenants and things that are legally required and that we're bound to as a society become our habitual practice, right? And so it's ingrained in all of the way we teach students in the school, the way we impart justice in the courts, and in the way we incarcerate people. So our policies and practices drive how we create those inequitable outcomes and disparities, and that's what gets shown on the news, right? So you can pick any three of these and probably be right. But thanks for sharing that. The next slide, and we're almost done, focuses on systemic bias related to gender inequity in our society. And this was very eye-opening to me. This diagram indicates the number of days women have to work into the next year. Let me repeat that. The number of days women have to work into the next year to earn as much as a white man. So we look down below, and Hispanic women have to work 307 days into the next year in a similar job to earn the same as a white man, all the way into November. Black women have to work 226 days or halfway through August of the next year to earn as much in a similar job as a white man. White women have to work halfway through April of the next year in order to earn as much as a white man. Asian women, God bless them, only have to work halfway through February. So they would have already earned by now, February 23rd, as much as a white man, according to this data point. So question, is that right? Is that fair? Does anybody have any thoughts on how maybe that happens over time?
Can I add a little to that?
Sure.
I think a lot of it, like with women, they don't account for when women take maternity leave. There's time taken off. Otherwise, I think there should be legal action taken if there is a difference in a certain person's pay. And why isn't legal action being taken?
When I was Chief Diversity Officer for the city, Mayor Andy Ginther and his wife Shannon Ginther developed what they call the Columbus Women's Commission. Some of you may have heard of that. And maybe some of your organizations that you work with have signed the Pay Equity Pledge. So they challenge several businesses, and including law firms throughout Central Ohio, to sign up for the pledge of pay equity to independently audit their own organizations for pay equity or pay disparities between women and men in similarly situated positions. And so again, that gets to the fact that equity applies to both people and circumstances. So this is when you would need to do an equity audit within your organizations to help ensure that you're paying people equitably, regardless of their gender, right? Now, let's get out that piece of paper or that trusted 10 slide, and I'm going to prompt you on how to complete this. This is the last slide we have for this afternoon. So give me a high sign when you have the form or when you've drawn the columns and rows on a piece of paper. Okay, great. For the first column, you see the first name. I just want you to put the first name of people that you trust. Now, the rules are no family members, either extended or immediate. You can't put any family members on your trusted 10 list. Now, these are people either at work, either in your social circles, at your church, at your work, at your gym where you work out. You know, this can be in work or in your social circles, people that you trust, people that you trust everything that they say, that you follow their advice, that you give them the last dollar out of your pocket, that you let them house sit, right? That you loan your car to them, whatever. Again, this could be a work trust relationship where you have to be on a working team with somebody who you've never met before, and you have to develop a level of trust with them, right? You define trust in your own way. I just want you to list up to 10. Now, since I stripped your family from you, you're going to struggle to get 5 names, I guarantee you. But up to 10 names of people that you trust, first name only. And then I'll prompt you to put what to put in the second column. First name only, people that you trust. Okay, for the next column, I want you to put the age of the trusted 10 list that you've listed. What are their ages? If you don't know exactly, just put 20-ish, 30-ish. But what is the age of the people you've listed for your trusted 10? the age. Next, I want you to put the education level of your trusted 10 that you've listed. High school degree, college degree, or graduate degree. Graduate or plus, whatever. High school, college, or grad educated for your trusted 10. Next column, I want you to put their marital status. Are they married or single? Don't worry about divorce. Married or single? Your trusted 10. Are they married or single? The next column, I want you to put the ability status of your trusted 10. Are they fully abled or disabled? If you know, I mean, and these can be invisible, like dyslexia or, you know, whatever disability, but that as you know them, are they fully abled or disabled? Your trusted 10 list. Fully abled or disabled. Next column, the gender of your trusted 10. Are they male or female? If you know, male or female? Gender, are they male or female? Next column, the sexual orientation of your listed trusted 10. For simplicity, are they straight or gay? Straight or gay, if you know. Sexual orientation of your trusted 10. The final column, ethnicity or race. Even though we've determined that race is not real, the race or ethnicity of your trusted 10, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, etc. What's the ethnicity or race of your trusted 10? Now, down at the bottom, you'll see notes. I want you to write one sentence, no more than two, of what jumps out at you about your trusted 10 list. What jumps out at you? What are your takeaways based on what your trusted 10 list looks like? Are there any patterns, trends? What do you notice or observe about your trusted 10 list? Write that down in a sentence or two. All right, now, I want you to unmute if you're willing to share what you've written down as that one or two sentence down at the bottom. What jumps out at you about what observations do you have about your trusted 10 list and what it looks like? Anybody want to share?
Mine is mostly women, straight, and pretty monochromatic.
Pretty melodramatic?
Monochromatic.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Anybody
That's
else
okay.
want to share? Anybody else want to share? What are your observations about what your list looks like?
They're very much just like me.
Very much just like you. That's a common response I get. I also get a response, hey, my list is very diverse. What this was, ladies and gentlemen, is a real-time assessment of our bias based on our comfort with familiarity and sameness. And I took this too, and the folks I wrote down look just like me, right? We need to work towards expanding our sphere of trust, our circle of trust, because guess what? Those people that we trust help shape and form our biases and the way we view the world, right? We must, if we see affinity or sameness in any of those columns that we listed, I want you to work hard to diversify those columns. I want to challenge you to take this Trusted 10 exercise 1 year from now. And between now and that 1 year where you have sameness and affinity in any of those columns, seek to diversify that circle of trust that you've identified. I don't want you to go up to a Black person and say, hey, I want you to trust me, you know, so let's get to know it. It's not like that. It's more like in your natural organic dealings during your day, your work day, your social circles, seek out people that have different viewpoints and different, you know, characteristics in you, to seek to find the commonalities that you have. You know, talk to people that you never bothered talking to before at the gym or at your church or at your job. The key is we can't choose our teams at work. The required skill and experience choose the team. And those people with the required skill and experience may look, think, act, love totally differently than we do. And so we need to be prepared for being able to work across differences, particularly at work. And so the more we expand our circle of trust with people that don't look like us, don't think like us, the more able we are to work agilely and proficiently across differences. So I hope that this has been helpful. I'll open it up for any questions, comments, or closing thoughts that any of you have. And I've really enjoyed being with you today, although it was just a short period. I had to speed through some of this content, and I apologize for that, but I hope you found it helpful.
I thought it was really interesting and thought-provoking, and thank you.
I agree, Steve. There's many comments in the chat of people that had to get off for work purposes, thanking you, and what a great exercise this was and presentation too.
Thank you. Well, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And this work is hard and it's ever changing. And so if your organizations don't have a diversity leader, Rebecca mentioned my role as president and longtime board member for Central Ohio Diversity Consortium. If you Google that, centralohiodiversity.org, you will find the ability to support that organization and be involved in quarterly best practices meetings for diversity, equity, inclusion, and just networking with organizations that all share a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and that are all searching for the ever-changing answers like everybody else. So I highly recommend you connect with Central Ohio Diversity Consortium and become a supporter. And that way you can get some of these best practices on a regular basis to help your organization.
Or awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for everyone hanging on the call as well. So what a fantastic presentation for all of us to hear and be a part of. So thank you for making it interactive and helping us understand where we are on the spectrum here and the work that we have to do too.
You're very welcome, and it was my pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.